Welcome to Seekers and Finders, the podcast where we explore the infinite pathways to truth, creativity, and connection.
The main things I found was that something atypical was happening in their lives at that time beforehand. So it could have been a crisis, it could have been just new ideas, it could have been something like that, but it being in a new place. So that was the thing, something was happening in their life, so that the worldview they had didn't allow for this new thing. So this new thing was almost like a challenge to their worldview. And then the experience happened. In the experience, they saw new connections. So the world started to look different. They made new connections between this and that in their life and in their experience and in what the world was really like. So they made these new connections. They thought that these new connections made everything more meaningful. The world had meaning now, and it touched them. They feel that they've realized new truths, that through the experience they understand themselves, they understand the world, they understand the supernatural, whatever, but some new truths were revealed to them, and they see the world in a new way afterwards. So you have this transformation. The general message of the thing is that they make life better. The people, something unusual is happening in their life. They have this experience, and in most cases, there is a kind of transformation for the better. And it doesn't have to include ideas of God or anything, but it just can make the world mean more sense to them and feel that the world is a good place, and it gives hope and it gives light and it gives joy to the people.
So let's introduce Ethna Herron. And today we're going to talk about her doctorate thesis, Godless Mystics, Atheists and Their Mystical Experiences Towards a Grounded Theory. And this is a topic I've been waiting to talk about for a long time. And let's start off by asking how you got here, what your background is with this, your own spiritual experience when you were, starting on the journey.
Okay, so I suppose the start of the journey was when I joined the Sri Chinmoy Center. That was about 1974-ish. And so I became like a devotee. And up until then, I was brought up a Catholic, taught by nuns, went to a convent school. So I was brought up kind of in a religious family, but I had more or less walked out of it when I was about 16. And then about 10 years later, I came in touch with, actually my sister and her husband were running the Sri Chinmoy Centre in Scotland. And so I knew the people who were there. And then a friend of mine wanted to go to classes, and I went with her, and then she wanted to join, but they wouldn't let me join because they wouldn't let me go to the meetings because I hadn't joined, I hadn't applied, So I didn't want to. I thought I didn't really want to live by the rules that they had in the centre. But one night I had a dream, and it was a dream of Sri Chinmoy the Master, and he was saying, "It's all about love, it's all about love." He took my hand and he was saying, "It's all about love, it's all about love." And I woke up and I thought, oh, that's a message for me. That's a message for me to join the centre. So that was really the start of, let's say, my spiritual seeking. I joined the centre, I started meditating every day, and I took part in all the activities. I went to New York regularly. I was in Scotland at the time. So that was how it all started.
And we should again announce to the audience that both Gary and I and yourself, we were at the Sri Chinmoy Center at the same time. We were in the New York Center and you were overseas. But we did get a chance to, get together during celebrations and everything. So,
Yeah.
so you were at the center, and at some point you left. I don't know if you want to go into that too much, but perhaps you can just tell us how your journey continued.
Okay, so during that early period, I had 3 or 4 what you might call spiritual experiences that affected me very deeply and made me feel this is definitely what I should be doing. And I was in for 27 years altogether. And eventually I left because I was unhappy about, I felt I wasn't making any progress and I was just generally unhappy. And I decided I was going to leave. But I was left with the problem. What was the meaning of these experiences? I had taken my experiences to mean this was the path I should be on. I should be following this path. The Sri Chinmoy is a genuine spiritual master and everything. But because I'd been unhappy and I left, then I thought, well, what did these really mean? Did they really mean, these experiences really mean that I was on the right path? So I had to kind of re-examine that. But I also wanted to keep the feeling that I was getting through meditation. I was having all through my spiritual life, I had really lovely meditations, very deep, peaceful, and sometimes very high. You could almost say very light, full of light and things. I always had lovely meditations. And I wanted to keep that going. So I started looking to see if there was anything else. And I looked at a few things, but nothing seemed to be, it seemed to me that I had been more committed than any of the people who were supposedly leading these other centers. I felt I had more experiences and dedicated more of my life to it. So I couldn't really accept any of these things that I looked at as being paths that I wanted to follow. And then one day I came across, because I was looking at the internet for things, I came across this master's degree at Heathrow College, which is one of the colleges of London University. And it was the psychology of religion. And they had different parts of the course, and one was about mysticism. So I wanted, because I was interested in the spiritual experiences and why mine had been so influential in my life, I was still trying to understand that when it hadn't worked out in the end, so I applied to get on the course, and I got on the course, and that's how I moved over to psychology and trying to study this topic. And after I got my,
let me ask you this: you basically a hard timer, 27 years. I mean, that's a very large indoctrination. How before you continue with the schooling, how did you unindoctrinate yourself? Because we know, both Gary and I, that there was so much sediment that was built up inside of us just based upon our short time there. And it really took most of our lives, I think. Perhaps Gary did it faster, but I'm still carrying the residue of it. It comes back in dreams. It comes back in meditations. It comes back in visions. How did you become undoctrinated from this and able to move on?
Well, I would say that I wanted to keep the feeling of meditation. I wanted to be able to keep that, but I was kind of aware that would probably fade over time without the reinforcement of seeing the guru and having communal meditations and that kind of thing. I thought it's probably going to fade, but I'll keep it going as long as I can. The kind of the feeling, the kind of little ecstasies and things like that, that you get through that. And I did keep it going for many, many years. And even now I can kind of go back into it sometimes, but I don't do it so much. But I can sometimes, if I want to, I can actually have meditation. So it was a kind of a slow decline. But also, I was in touch with other former followers of Sri Chinmoy. So that helped detoxify me, if you want, detoxify me. Just hearing the different stories that other people had and the different experiences, I began to reframe the whole thing in a different way, I would say. While still, funny enough, there were still aspects of it that I still liked, like mainly the meditation. And then when I started studying the psychology of religion, one of the interesting things I found was that a lot of mainstream religion has a lot of the stuff that we were doing. It has things like the community. A lot of people who are in mainstream religion do have spiritual experiences. In fact, when I was doing my master's, I did a little survey. I mean, it wasn't high class, let's say, but that particular college only taught two areas. One was religion and one was philosophy. So 80 people, I was asking these questions. I did a survey and I was asking these questions. And one of the questions was, have you ever had a spiritual experience, something you would call a spiritual experience? And all the people who were studying religious topics all had one. And all the ones who were studying philosophy, none of them had had one. And I thought that was quite interesting, So in my mind, I was associating spiritual experiences with religion. And but religious people do have a lot of the things that we experienced as followers of Sri Chinmoy.
Do you think the religious people were looking for the mystical experiences as opposed to the philosophy students who just were not looking for the experiences? Is it something in the mind that directed them towards this?
Yeah, yes, possibly they were brought up in religion, so they were used to the stories of the story of the resurrection in itself. If you look at the story of the resurrection was Christ went through this torture, and then he died, and then he rose complete divine, and that is actually the story of a lot of spiritual experiences, because one of the most common times when people have them is they're going through existential crisis. They're going through real pain and unhappiness and things. They have this experience and a new person almost comes out of it, So like Christians, I know, like me being brought up a Catholic, okay, but I know as Catholics, you're told, like in the lead up to Easter, where you have the Good Friday and the suffering, what's it, the Passion of Christ. They call it the Passion of Christ, and this is when he was carrying his cross and he was, everything. He was through this torture. You're told to focus on that and identify with Christ's suffering, and then Easter is the big celebration when Christ rises. But that is exactly the story of that people go through with spiritual experiences, Or a lot of people, it happens in other circumstances as well, but that's a very, very common one. So Christians do have this this image of despair and savior, being saved, salvation, which is interesting. But one of the things, when I was on the doing my master's, I decided to be totally open with people. And a lot of the people in the course, about half the course maybe were members of the clergy, and others were people who were very active in the church. I think there were 2 atheists on the course as well. And I decided to be open. So when they were saying what they were in, I said, I was in a cult. And they went, ah! And I was laughing because I was thinking, you don't realize it, but you're in a cult too, because what we were learning, a lot of the stuff we
Right.
were discovering about psychology of religion, it applied equally to people in mainstream religion and to us in smaller new religious movements. It was the same feelings people were having. People had the same attitude towards their leaders, their saviors, and all this kind of thing. And really, size was the main difference. The size of the organization was the main difference.
I'm curious though, how you went from the religious uh, uh, people in the master's course to deciding to work with atheists. What was that process like?
Okay, so while I was on doing the master's in psychology of religion, while I was doing that, Richard Dawkins, who was like a professional atheist, he was a professor at Oxford, I think he was in Oxford, and he wrote The God Delusion, which got an awful lot of publicity. I mean, you have to understand that Britain is not nearly as religious as America, so I don't know if atheism was getting a lot of attention at that time, but it was getting a lot of attention in Britain. And I read The God Delusion, I found it really interesting. And then, because I was studying psychology of religion, there was an event happening in London where there were various speakers. And one of the speakers, I had read some of his work, and he specialized in spiritual experiences and a few other things. I'd read these papers. So I wanted to go and see him and to hear him. So I went along, and at this conference, there was probably about 200 or 300 people in the audience. It was full. And I sat in the second row because I really wanted to hear what this guy had to say. I sat in the second row and I was really listening. And he started off by asking if people had ever had an experience, whether they call it God or not, that was unlike ordinary everyday experience. And I knew that other researchers had used that question, and I thought, why is he asking this question to atheists? Because the hall was a place where the event had been advertised through atheist channels, and the hall was one that was used by non-religious groups, humanists and National Secular Society and things. So it was likely that most of the audience would be atheists, And I thought, why are you asking that question? These people are all atheists. They won't have had that kind of experience. And I turned round, and about a third of the audience had their hand up. So this was the first time I realized that atheists also have unusual experiences. So anyway, I got my master's, and then after a few years, I thought I might like to do a PhD because I still wanted to find out more. And I decided then for my topic, because I've been so surprised at the atheists who put up their hand when they were asked that question, and no one had studied that before, I thought I'll study that. I'll make that the object of my thesis. Find some atheists who've had these experiences and find out what it's all about.
So can you
So-
can you give us some examples? So now you're into your doctorate and you start to interview. First of all, how did you find these people?
What I did was I knew that these atheist groups, they often sent out newsletters with news, different things of interest to atheists. So I contacted a few of them and I said, in your next newsletter, could you ask your subscribers, have you ever had a spiritual experience? Or first of all, they had to be an atheist. Secondly, they had to have some kind of experience that they consider maybe enlightening or transformative, a sudden experience that was enlightening or transformative. And would they be prepared to take part in my research? And if so, could they contact me? So they contacted me, about 30 people contacted me, and I sent out a kind of questionnaire to them. And then of the ones that contacted me, to get a wide variety, I think 11 of them were interviewed in depth for quite a long interview, where I asked, so they all told their story in writing, first of all. So they were analysed first. The writings they did were analysed first, and it was clear that they were giving a lot of emphasis I hadn't told them what to write, I just said, give a description of it, but they were giving a lot of emphasis to what was happening in their lives before they had their experience. And some of them had this kind of existential crisis, the kind of the suffering and then the resurrection almost, some of them were having that. But other ones were just having, like, introduced to new ideas, which I would say was what happened to me when I first became a follower. I'd been introduced to Eastern religion for the first time, and then I had these experiences. So they weren't all a case of suffering and then the experience and then transformation. It could also just be exposure to something new, that was another one. Or even, like, there was someone who was climbing a mountain or something, climbing a hill, and suddenly they looked out over the landscape and they just full of awe at what they saw. It was just this sudden thing they saw, it was full, and they considered that a really deep spiritual experience, and kind of the sacredness of nature, to see this sight. But then there were other ones that were, it was a suffering, they were going through an existential crisis, and they had this sudden illumination, you could say. Yeah, so there was a variety of so I had the 11, and they were ones that had written particularly interesting, quite lengthy descriptions of their experience, and then I interviewed them at depth. And yeah.
So there were 11 people altogether that you decided on. Is that the
for the interviews, but the written descriptions were also analysed. They were analysed as well to give an overall picture of what was happening. And then 11. There were other things in my thesis as well, but this is the main part that we're talking about today.
right?
Yeah.
Did it change their views on God?
Yeah,
Did
it was quite interesting. Two of them had conversion experiences. That's another area where, well, this is being exposed to new ideas. People often, if they convert from one religion to another, it's often accompanied by one of these experiences. So I had one person who was an atheist, and her father was going through some kind of thing. He had been atheist, and he was being baptized. And during that, this person had a sudden experience that she wanted to be a Christian, and that God existed, there was a God, and she wanted to be existent. So this one person changed from being an atheist to being a Christian through an experience, And there was another one who changed from being a Christian, had a sudden experience, and became an atheist, which was quite interesting. And both of them involved a spiritual experience, was the turning point, the transformation point for them.
So was there a differentiation between an emotional experience, a mental experience, a visual experience? Were they all combined? I mean, did certain people just have an emotional experience and, moved on from there? Did some of them have visual things show up in their lives where they saw the spirit, or were some of them just mentally in a mental construct that changed their whole attitude about it?
All of those, I would say. I would say all of them. I'd say a few involved visual things, maybe even. Well, it depends.
Can you give us some examples?
Religious people.
Would that be okay to dig into your thesis?
I'll give you a very nice example of one person. There was one person. She was a woman. She was gay, and I think she was living in Germany at the time or something, and her partner. Her partner became very ill and died, and of cancer. And it turned out that they had done up the house, and some of the paints or something that they had used in the house had been poisonous, and her partner had died of cancer. And this woman was kind of blaming herself. So she was one who was in despair and a really, really feeling bad. And she had a mental breakdown, and she had a psychiatrist who was looking after her, and the psychiatrist was a born-again Christian. And so one day she was in despair, and suddenly she had this experience, and she fell to the floor, and she was on the floor, and she had this experience, and the experience told her, she understood the experience to be the feeling of God's love, that there was a God, and God totally accepted her, totally loved her, and it was almost like at that point she was saved, because she had been in such despair over the death of her partner. And it was like she was saved there, and she became kind of religious. But the story went on, she became kind of religious, but religion didn't accept her because she was gay. And that created another crisis. She went, this pastor, she told the pastor her story and how she'd had this revelation that God was real and God had loved her, God loved her truly for who she was and everything, and it was totally life-saving for her. And the pastor said to her, your partner, who is deceased, is now burning in hellfire. Because she was gay, because she was gay and she didn't repent. Can you imagine? Can you imagine?
That's ignorance at its fullest.
Yeah, that was tough. When you knew her story, and then for someone to say that to her, it was so sad. So that was a highly emotional experience for her. That was highly emotional, and that she said she felt God's love. So that would be a very emotional experience, feeling God's love during that experience. So that's an example. So there's other ones, like the person up the mountain who just saw the landscape. I didn't interview that one, but she saw the landscape. So that was a kind of a visual thing. It was like she saw God in the landscape on top of this mountain. It just came very suddenly. She turned around and she saw it all, So that was like an experience of deep awe. But I think there were one or two auditory ones as well. They heard a message, and sometimes saw something. Yeah, there was a whole range of experiences. Yeah, but they all, the ones I chose were all kind of life transforming,
With the priest telling that person, giving that person the information about burning in hell, the whole concept of sin doesn't really fall under an atheist's umbrella, I would say. I mean, if they don't believe in God, then they don't believe in sin. And so, the whole concept of this betrayal of sin from a God who is all loving. If we are all part of God and God is all loving, then why should he cast someone who is slightly different in some way into the fires of hell? I mean, that makes absolutely no sense to me. So,
yeah, I guess it was just maybe very fundamentalist, and it wasn't going to change, and everyone had to fit into his categories of good and bad, and but obviously he wasn't a very good he wasn't the person she needed to meet at that time,
No. So Gary, what do you think?
What I would offer is, hey, you can't say. Maybe that was the person she needed to meet at the time and get the message and realize that that whole religious fundamental thing is a crock of shit. Now, if she really, and I don't doubt that she did, have an experience of God's love, then she wouldn't have to listen to any human take on anything, because that's what spiritual experience is all about. It gives one, and I'm just talking from my own experience, not from anybody else's. It gives one a sense of authority that let's say I have, that I don't need to, somebody tells me I'm going to go to hell, or I'm doing this, or I'm having
Yeah.
bad karma, or I'm going to be cursed in my next incarnation because I left my guru. All this crap, which I consider to be total shit,
Yeah.
means nothing to me because I have the authority, my own authority, based on my own experience.
Yeah.
So as far as that woman goes, I'm saying maybe it's good that she met him. Then you can say, look, these people out here, what do they know? What do they know? You know, they have their
Yeah.
beliefs, they have their concepts, they have their thing. It says in the Bible this, so they say that. But when you have based on your own spiritual experience, your own authority, and you are the authority of as to what to which way to go, what to do. That's very
Yeah.
liberating. So I think
Yeah.
maybe was good for the woman.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, liberal Christian communities, for people were nice to each other, and I don't know that she was like totally committed Christian, but she liked the feeling, and she was involved with some other groups. That's as much as I know. So I think everything worked out okay for her in the end, but it was just an example of one quite dramatic one. Quite a dramatic
Did you ask
experience.
these people why they were atheists, how they became atheists, if they had God in their life first, and then just something happened that they no longer believed that there was? I mean, what brought them to this
I,
point?
I didn't I didn't ask them. I think I asked them how long have they been atheists. So some people had been brought up in non-religious families, so they were kind of born atheists. Those kind of atheists, like in Britain and in Europe, because atheism, every generation, I think in the 20th century, certainly from the mid 20th century, every generation in Europe and Britain has been less religious than the previous generation. So now the
Right.
majority of people in Britain don't identify with having a religion at all. Whereas which is a much lower number than in America. They're still predominantly religious in America, although they are also declining in religious belief, but at a slower rate.
Well, let me ask
So
you now about yourself. I mean, since you were indoctrinated into um, a, a Hindu kind of uh, mindset when you were with Sri Chinmoy, and there were all of those uh, multi-faceted gods and goddesses. Uh, do you still see that as part of your ecstasy?
regarding all the thing is the Sri Chinmoy Centre, at least from where I was in Scotland, and just going to, I mean, I read all the books and everything, and then I would see him go to New York maybe 2 or 3 times a year, or he would come to Britain. Um, it was definitely Hinduism light. It wasn't heavy duty Hinduism, and a lot of the kind of Hindu beliefs, I kind of accepted that. I accepted them, but you didn't have to believe in them. Like I never totally bought into reincarnation, for example, and the Hindu gods. Well, it's quite interesting, but it wasn't an important part of my belief system. I could take it or leave it, kind of thing. That way, I was that way with reincarnation as well. I could take it or leave it. It wasn't a fundamental thing that I had built my belief system on. It was a kind of peripheral thing that was there. So if he said it, they were there. He said there were all these gods and everything. That's fine. I'll believe it. And then after I left, I didn't really believe it, but I still kind of respect it. There's some people believe in it, and that's fine. That's their belief system. But it's not a core. It was never a core element of my belief system.
What I would be interested in, take the people in your study. So some had a mystical experience, and let's say, came to Jesus. The other one had a mystical experience and left Jesus. My question would be, I'm interested in people how they navigate the spiritual path. So I would say, okay, as a result of these mystical experiences, whether atheists or not, that doesn't really matter. What then? Were they inspired to follow a spiritual path? That they then have a sense like, oh, now I want to become one with God or one with the whatever, the universe? Was there any like follow up? I know the woman that you spoke of, who got kind of slammed by the pastor. She went on to join other groups. But so I would be interested in like phase two. Did they go on to explore
Okay.
the spiritual life any further?
Okay, so there were two who you could say converted to Christianity. So there was that woman who I spoke about, and the other one who had the experience in a church, and she went on to be a Christian. The others did not embrace religion afterwards; they stayed atheist. So then the question was, see, I was wanting to understand how do they make sense of their experience, and I don't know the number. There was a few of them who just said, my mind's playing tricks on me, and they just dismissed it. So they told the story. They'd gone through some kind of, usually there was something happening in their lives at the time that was kind of unsettling. They had the experience, and a few of them said, it's my mind playing tricks on me, and it wasn't important to them. They just dismissed it. And then there were other ones who the message they got from their spiritual experience say the woman who had this experience at the top of the hill or the mountain, that experience didn't make her suddenly believe in God, but a few of them said they understand religion now. Although they didn't believe in religion, they now understood why people believed because of these experiences. So they were less adamant in their atheism, and they were more kind of compassionate to religious believers rather than just insulting them, which often atheists are quite insulting to religious people. So they were more compassionate and more understanding about why people believe because of these kind of experiences that people can have and how they can be helpful to people. So you had that, and then you had so there was a whole range from people totally dismissing it to people understanding religion to people understanding it in atheist terms and trying to see it in psychological terms, in terms of brain function and creating homeostasis in their lives, just as trying to sort out the problem. So there was a whole range of responses to it, including some who had transformed their life as a result of it. So, yeah, a few changed their belief, a few changed their attitudes and behaviors, and a few just dismissed it and just kept on being atheist. Yeah. So there wasn't just one simple thing. The things that were constant were something happening in their lives beforehand, before something that kind of triggered this experience. That was a kind of constant. It wasn't always suffering. It could just be exposure to new ideas. And often, even if they didn't believe in God afterwards, often they had a new mental construct of what the world is and what the world is like. So it was a change in that way rather than a belief in God for many of them.
I was going to say, I think this is good. Your research, especially because it brings out like people, I think in general associate spiritual experiences with conversion experiences, and now they're on the path to God, and now they're holding. But your research shows that that's not necessarily the case at all, because obviously it must have been profound to each one of them in their own way. And other people, felt God's love. So it's a whole variety of things. So spiritual experience, this is my takeaway. Spiritual experience in and of itself does not mean any particular thing. It's how it filters through the conditioning of the being, and then, it works out in their
Yeah.
lives. So, that's very interesting. Mysticism and mystical experiences is all, these kind of conversion things, like, like Paul on the road to Damascus and stuff like that. So this is good, because
Yeah.
this brings in the other element, real life. Like, hey, something you can have a mystical experience and then say, I must have drank too much coffee or whatever. In other words, it's not always one thing.
Well, obviously the dramatic ones are the ones we hear about. They're the ones that get published, and people talk about they talk about the dramatic ones. But actually, in the surveys they've done, about a third of the population have had some kind of experience that would fit into that category. So the group I had was actually quite representative in that respect, in that there were a few that were dramatic experiences and other ones weren't. But they're actually very, very common.
I agree with you. I agree with you. I think in a room, like I just came back from a conference, spiritual type of conference, in Austin, Texas, where there are about 20 people. I can almost guarantee, there was no survey taken, but I would bet anything that everybody in that room has had some mystical or religious type of experience, and that's probably partly why they showed up there. But I think in the general population, even not spiritual seekers per se, but just general people, I would think most people, 90%, I'm guessing, have had in their lives spiritual experiences, and because I think it's not a big deal. I think it's not a big deal unless it is one of those type of things like Paul on the road to Damascus, where you have this great conversion experience.
Yeah.
And those are the one, as you point out, get all the publicity, and everybody says, "Oh, oh my God, I want to be like that guy." Whereas I think spiritual experiences happen a whole lot, but nobody's going to go out and write a book about. I was driving to the store, and I felt God's love just sweep in. Well, yeah, okay. I mean, I think that's common. Or spiritual experience in general. I think it's common, and I don't really think they're that big a deal, frankly.
Another thing that was quite interesting was that people interpret their experience in some way, or they talk about it in some way, that with a lot of people that changed over time, how they interpreted it. So that at the time they might have felt it was God was there, and then a year later looking back, they might have think, no, it was just my brain doing this, and 10 years afterwards they might think, well, that was stupid, I had too much coffee or something, So people can change their interpretation over time.
Yeah, and you know what? I've done that myself. I look back at different experiences I've had, and if you asked me 5 years ago, I'd give you one story. I'll give you another story today, because stories always change. You have the speaking of Screeching Moy Center. So 1972, I had this big blah 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 experience, and now I remember and describing it different times in my life to different people in different ways. So that's another good point, because it's all based on memory, and memory, gets fuzzy and it gets interpreted. And then no matter if I tell you a story today about my experience going to this conference, let's say last weekend, and then I hook up with you next week, there'll be a different story. I mean, it might have the same, some common elements, but it'll be a different story. So that's another thing to keep in mind. You interview people and you get like a snapshot. Oh, this is what happened to me, blah, blah, blah. But that's just a snapshot. But as time goes on, things morph and change. You see them 5 years down the road, and that's what you're pointing out. Is that you can get a whole different story. So I think all this stuff is very good to keep in mind, even when we look at our own experiences. Is like, well, what story am I telling now about, this great experience I had in 1972 or whenever?
Yeah.
But it's up to the personality of the person, really, because some people are looking for the experience, like I had mentioned before. Others who weren't looking for the experience might just have that kind of personality that says, "Oh, okay," and fluff it off, and it may not have any meaning to them at this time in their life or ever. And to me, you mentioned the word ecstasy when you were having experiences at the Sri Chinmoy Center, and that is a word that's very, very powerful. I don't know if you're overwhelmed, but you're overcome by this very strong, powerful force. There must be some atheists who were changed and will continue searching for those particular experience, and others who are going to say, whatever, that was nice, let's move on, right?
Yeah. But you say that people are looking for it. I had a funny experience early on. I'll tell you about it. I was in the center, and I had read. It was early on when I was in the center, and I had read. We had a library in Glasgow where we had different spiritual books, not just Sri Chinmoy's, and I had read the Ramakrishna one. What was it called? I can't remember the name of it.
It's called the Gospel
Life of
the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. That was like a major book that I discovered while I was in the center too, like one of the major books of all time. The Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna by Swami Nikhilananda.
Yeah, that's right. So I had read that book, and Ramakrishna used to say, pray to the mother, cry out to the mother like a child, cry like a child, and the mother will come, And I was a mother with a young child. So I knew how a child cries, and how when a child cries, as a mother, you have to go to that child. So I was meditating, and I was kind of trying to identify with the child crying. I was thinking of my own daughter, and I was thinking, the way she cries, cry like that so that the mother has to come. And I was really crying inwardly. And I had this experience, this incredible experience, and wow, so you can actually, that's the only time I've done it, just a one. But I thought, wow, you can actually create these experiences in yourself by doing certain things. You can actually create the experience. So that was interesting. Stefan had said that you can make the experience happen almost.
Some of these people must have had these extraordinary experiences that they said, whether you interviewed them or not, were there experiences of just beyond, something that you would have understood when you were at the Sri Chinmoy Center?
All of them I kind of understood from my experiences at the Sri Chinmoy Center. Most of the ones that I interviewed were transformative experiences, that the person changed as a result of it. There'd been something going on in their life, and they had these experience, and their life was different afterwards. That is the most common formula.
Did you explain to them? Did you explain to them about your experiences? Did they identify with what you were telling them about your spiritual experiences, or you left that out of the story?
I left everything about myself out of it because I didn't want to influence them one way or the other. I just wanted them to talk freely about their own thing, and I would just listen without judgment and ask. So I might ask extra questions. Now, once the recording had finished and the interview was over, then sometimes we would chat. But I don't think I ever spoke about. I maybe say, yeah, I understand. I've come across that before. I might say something like that after the interview had been finished and recorded. But I didn't say anything in advance because I didn't want to influence what they were saying.
Did their story change after you told them your story? Did they elaborate more?
I didn't tell them that much about my story. It would just be a few words. So I didn't say very much because I had to be professional.
Right,
but I was carrying out a study.
But the fact that you, as a researcher, they may not have felt as open initially, but after you finished and turned off the recorder, and gave them your background, maybe they felt more safe and was able to open up to you more. Do you see any of that happen?
To be honest, I can't remember, because I wasn't that open with them, you know. I would have kept it very light. The thing is, when you're doing these interviews, you're trying to have rapport with the person, so that they'll open up and they'll tell you about how they were feeling and why they were doing this and what it felt like and what they understood it to mean. You know, they're telling you these kinds of things, but you have to kind of also keep a distance, you know, because you are doing it as a researcher. You're not.
For the sake of the podcast, can you give us 5 questions, strong questions that you might have asked them that perhaps our audience can think about in their own life as far as having spiritual experience, mystical experience?
Well, let's say the 5 main things that they told me about, because what I asked them about is not that important, but it's what they told me. So sometimes I would ask a question and then they'd say something, and then I'd go with them on that and ask them more about that. So the main things I found was that something atypical was happening in their lives at that time beforehand. So it could have been a crisis. It could have been just new ideas. It could have been something like that, but it being in a new place. So that was the thing. Something was happening in their life, so that the worldview they had didn't allow for this new thing. So this new thing was almost like a challenge to their worldview. And so that was the first thing that happened. And then the experience happened. In the experience, they saw new connections. You know, so the world started to look different. They made new connections between this and that in their life and in their experience and in what the world was really like. So they made these new connections. They thought that these new connections made everything more meaningful, that the world had meaning now, and it touched them. They feel that they've realized new truths, that through the experience, they understand themselves, they understand the world, they understand the supernatural, whatever, but some new truths were revealed to them, and they see the world in a new way afterwards. So you have this transformation. So this was a general story of what they were telling me, that something unusual was happening in their lives. They had this sudden experience where they started to see the world in a new way, in a more satisfying way, in a more meaningful way, and they felt better for it. So it was definitely, they felt good for it, and it was an important thing in their lives. The general message of the thing is that they make life better. The people, something unusual is happening in their life. They have this experience, and in most cases, there is a kind of transformation for the better. And it doesn't have to include ideas of God or anything, but it just can make the world mean more sense to them and feel that the world is a good place, and it gives hope and it gives light and it gives joy to the people. So the major themes that were coming through was the unusual things happening in their life, and kind of disruption to their life beforehand. And then they have this kind of phenomenological turbulence, you could say, where different things were happening in their life, in their experience. You know, they were maybe seeing something, hearing something, understanding something. Then after the event, they were making sense of it. And sometimes their identity changed, and they had to kind of harmonize their new understanding of the world with their identity. So there was this kind of sorting out, were they atheists? Were they still atheists? What kind of atheists were they still? Was this compatible, or do you give up on the experience and keep your atheism, or do you totally accept the experience and change your identity? So there was there could be a conflict between identity and the meaning of the experience, and that had to be resolved. So for some people, it took years and years for them to resolve it. Other people just converted on the spot, But there can be, because the experience is like a new vision of life, there can be this conflict between who they were, who they think they are, their identity, and the new revelation. And they have to get a new balance between these two.
And my takeaway is this. Everybody's gonna have their own takeaway naturally. My takeaway is this: spiritual experiences, yeah, are very interesting and impactful and could change one's life in a variety of ways. But my takeaway is it's perfectly, if I'm basing my view of spiritual experiences on your research, if I were to do that, and I don't have to do that because I already kind of have formulated this point of view that I have this opinion, that I would say spiritual experiences, as interesting as they may be, are not the end all and be all. They may be helpful. They may point you down the road further, or they may do this, or they may lighten your load and all that, which is all very good, but not the end all and be all, and that they shouldn't be. And I'll go out on a limb and say they shouldn't be sought. If they come naturally, all well and good. And this is what part of Ramakrishna's message, by the way, we were talking about earlier, the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, how great a book that was, and how that inspired you to call out to the mother because of his example. But he also says, this is my take on his thing. Don't seek these things. If they come, they come unbidden. So that's my whole takeaway. And I certainly got a lot from this conversation. And I'm happy you came and graced us with your presence and your knowledge and your research.
So thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you. We'll do this again, I hope, or when you write your next doctorate thesis.
but also I'd say that where I am now is very much, I don't really see myself as following a spiritual path or anything, but I'm not judgmental. I just, whatever works for people, and if people want these experiences and have these experiences and love these experiences, fantastic. If people move on from them and they don't want them anymore, or they don't care anymore, fantastic. As people work out a life that is reasonable for them, that they can live, and good luck to everyone,
Thank you, Ethna.
So that was Ethna Herron.
Yes, Alice Ethna Herron.
Yeah, interesting topic, interesting research. Once again, proving that everybody's going to have their own unique experience, and all they can do or we can do is report on that. In other words, our own unique experience. And
that's what we really want to do, though. I mean, look, we've talked about this endlessly, but in the end, it's all about you and what you've got out of this. So whoever's listening, think about your own place or not, But come back to our podcast, because we have some more interesting people coming down the pike.
Oh, and we have somebody coming down the pike in a few days, right?
We certainly do.
Oh, yeah, stay tuned. We have Harry Rob Bruna, another one of our Guru Bhais, I guess we could call him that we were together. And Rob, I think it was me who dubbed him Nephew of the Universe. We'll explore that one. That's going to be a very interesting topic, I think. Nephew, what does it mean to be the nephew of the universe? So
you laid that moniker on him?
I believe so. Yes, I do believe. I believe so. I don't, it's been a long.
So before we get to him, how does he feel about it?
I think he loves it. I think he's making a documentary, by the way. He's making a documentary called Nephew of the Universe. Well, he can tell us if I gave him that one or not. I believe I did, but it's like 40, 50 years ago. I don't know. My memory, and that's a whole other thing about these, recounting spiritual experiences. The memory changes. Now, if you say, well, tell us about your experience, Gary, in 1972 when you had that big, blah, 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 amazing experience, I would, probably give you a different story than I gave, somebody 10 years ago. So that's another factor. But I do believe I dubbed Harry, uh, what was his spiritual name? Garanga. His spiritual name was Garanga. I wonder if
Wow, that's powerful, man.
I wonder if Garanga still uses his spiritual name. Like I love
Lord
my
Garanga. Lord Garanga.
I love my spiritual name, but I don't use it. But if somebody wants to use it, hey, I love it. But some people, like want to distance themselves from that whole Sri Chinmoy thing, maybe to the point of view like, don't call me, I don't use that name anymore. It all depends on what your experience was like in the center with the guru, and what happened to you, I guess, later on down the road. But I'm good with it all. I thought it was a very valuable experience.
Okay, so that's it for today, man.
Let's rock out.
We'll rock out. We'll see you next time.
Okay, rock out with your lingam out. I don't know, whatever.